You're live.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our virtual session that we're going to be sharing with families in the community today on managing stress during stressful times. We have a group of staff that are going to be collaborating together. We have our student services staff from Shaler Area School District, and then we're working together with this presentation with HSAO and members of their staff will be helping just to kind of present a softer way of little tips and advice, pieces of advice, and how you can actually try to manage stress for yourself and how you can put those into motion for your children at home. So as we begin, I'm going to pull our presentation up so that you can follow along at home. And can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay.
You can see it, Dr. Graysick.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for introducing me, Christy. I'm Kathy Graysick. I'm the Director of Student Services with the Shaler Area School District. In my position, I supervise the services that are provided to students under the areas of school counseling, school social work, our school nurses and health offices, our special education teachers, paraprofessionals, school psychologists. So it's a rather large department that we're a part of, that we are really blessed to have the staff and able to provide a lot of support for students, even pre-COVID pandemic. And now that we're in, a year into trying to do a more creative way of providing instruction with students and meeting their needs, we are just finding pockets of areas where we want to really try to help families focus on finding better techniques and some ideas that might help make it a little less stressful to work through. So, in starting out, we're going to focus a little bit on our school counselors and our social workers. So just a little bit of a summary about what each of them do. Our school counselors support all of our students by managing emotions and applying interpersonal skills. School counseling classroom lessons are based on student mindsets and behavioral standards. And then there's short-term and individual counseling and group counseling to students. So, these are very small bulleted lists of what their bigger list entails. But one of the big things that our school counselors help with is collaboration with families, teachers, administrators, and community for student success. And most of all, advocacy for students at individual IEP meetings for special ed students and other student-focused meetings, and trying to work with the families to do our best to get advocacy started and services in place. Our school social workers support students at risk and needs and the higher levels. Oops, sorry about that. Screen's touchy today. The social workers are really in tune with really making connections with family and the community. And the Students Assistance Program is tied directly into what we do in our Student Services Department. Our Students Assistant Program, or SAP, as many of you may know it to be called by, is a data-driven, team-based approach to identify barriers to learning for identified students. So the referrals can be made. A student can refer themselves, a teacher can refer, a parent can refer, a principal can refer. And once that referral goes into place, the SAP team works together with the members of the team that are diverse in the building that they're in, and they try to develop and recommend a plan that will help eliminate those barriers to education. Our SAP providers are going to be co-supporting, co-presenting with us tonight. So in a bit, we'll introduce them. Then I'm going to move on to the primary school support staff and introduce them to you. Tonight we have with us our 3 primary school counselors, Leslie Delvecchio Marks, who is at Birchfield and Reserve.
Hi,
Heather,
hi everyone, thank you.
Heather Kimmel, who is at Marzoff.
Hello, good evening.
And Marianne Schwartz, who is at Scott and Reserve.
Hello, good evening.
And Lisa Tagmeyer is our school social worker who supports all 4 of the primary buildings.
Hi.
And so I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Delvecchio Marks, who love to note that was chosen for National School Counselor of the Year this year. So we're very proud of her accomplishments and, want to continue supporting her in that honor. So Leslie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graysick. And I really want to, on behalf of Mrs. Kimmel, Mrs. Schwartz, and Mrs. Tagmeyer, thank you for attending tonight and joining us. Part of what we want to do tonight is support all of the families and what you're going through in this pandemic too, and really talking about what services we're trying to provide to the students in our care. And as Dr. Graysick said, one of the main things to know about school counselors and social workers is that we really try to service all students. And we do that in different forms, different tiers, as we call it. We sometimes will pull small groups of students who need more individualized support, and then even individual students through counseling or crisis management if they have even higher degrees of need. But one of the greatest way to service all students is through classroom lessons or school-wide programming. And I really want to showcase on behalf of my colleagues what the primary school counseling staff has done in the classroom. So basically, when we do classroom instruction, that means that we visit each classroom just like a teacher, and we look at data to guide how we're going to set up our programming for the year. And this year, due to the pandemic, we've had to be a little bit more creative. And the counselors and social worker and I have been really trying to work hard to collaborate in a way that really encompasses all of their needs. In a typical year, and in this year, we service students in 3 domains: academic, social, emotional, and career. But this year, because of the specific needs that our students have showed us that they have during this pandemic, we focused a lot on social emotional. And our classroom lessons that we provide this year, really, we have them listed here, are really intentional in how we're going to provide services because of the increased anxiety and other social emotional needs they have. So some examples of classroom lessons that we've done or are planning to do this year are around emotions and managing stress, managing emotions and regulating those emotions. We've taught our students calming tools. We've actually taught our students how to navigate through the virtual calming room that the district we'll talk about later in this presentation that we have available for K through 12 students. And we've also highlighted differences that are taking place in families and in our students, just in general, not only like outward differences, but how we're accepting everything that's happening in our lives and how this pandemic has affected us all individually. And we've also noticed our data has shown us that because our students aren't in school like they would be in a typical year, that our youngest learners really are going to benefit from some assistance in general friendship skills. So for example, our kindergarten and first grade students, we're going to be teaching them topics that we may not have had to do in the past, like sharing and taking turns and joining a group. So this is really a nice way for all of the counselors to really get to know your children and for them to get to know us, because we're able to get into that classroom. And just at the bottom of the slide, I just wanted to show us how we've been delivering services this year. And in the bottom left, we have Mrs. Schwartz, who's actually delivering a lesson in the hybrid model. So she has some students online that are watching her, and she has students in front of her. And in the middle is actually a snapshot of a virtual lesson that I did for our students during the time we were all virtual. So I'm actually teaching the students some breathing strategies and calming tools. And then in the bottom right, we have Mrs. Kimmel, who is also, she has a group of students in front of her. Other students are online. She's reading a story, and often stories at our level supplement the delivery of services that we're providing because the students like that. So this is just a nice way to showcase how we're delivering our services. One thing I do want to mention is usually towards the end of the year, in a typical year, we'll do this year, our 4th grade counselor from the elementary school, who's actually the 6th grade counselor, who is going to be the 4th grade counselor for our current 3rd graders, will introduce himself or herself, talk about programming at the next level, and help with the transition to that next level. So I'm actually going to use this as a way to transition to our our elementary school counselors who are going to talk more about the services they're providing in this environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. That was a good lead into it. A lot of what we're doing in the next couple months will be really transition based, the way Leslie had talked about it. So we want to make sure that each time a student moves from one grade to the next, and more importantly, one building to the next, that we have a team in both buildings in place to review the services that they've received in the previous building. And we review them to make sure they're still appropriate for the next building. And then starting right on the first day of school, no services can be missed. So we'd like to do that review in the spring just to make sure that everything that the child needs is in place for the first day of school. So I'm going to introduce to you our elementary school support staff. We have Mr. Jim Jowers, who is 4th grade this year.
Good evening.
And Mr. Andy Sieber, who is 6th grade this year. And we have Beth Solninko, who is 5th grade this year and our department chair for counseling.
Hi, everybody.
And we have Lori Cortazzo, who is our school social worker for the elementary school.
Hi there.
Okay, so I'm going to let Beth take over and talk a little about grades 4, 5, and 6 and what they do in their building.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Graysick. Similar to Mrs. Delvecchio Marks, we do, and the primary counselors, we do and offer the large group classroom guidance lessons. So you can see some of the topics that we have covered throughout the school year and continue to help support every student in our building. We do find that at times there are students who may need some extra additional services, and we provide those in the forms of our small group peer support lessons. So we have covered things like organizational skills and stress management. We've seen a need for real connections with the kids and each other, you know, as we're going through these virtual learning days. So peer or friendship groups are also something that we've been offering to the students here at the elementary building. We've also seen needs as they've popped up for grief and loss groups. So we've offered those throughout the year. And we do try and match the services that we provide in the small group settings to the students' needs. So as needs arrive, we make sure that we try and connect those students with the services that they show a need for. You know, some of these groups occur during or through our Google Classrooms. And at every level, you'll find a K-12, the counselors have and social workers have Google Classrooms. And we use those to provide those supports and those resources and helpful information on where to turn, you know, for each of our students. So they can reach out and contact us there. And, you know, at this point, what we're finding out is that our Google Classrooms are becoming more and more important as we, you know, work through these virtual models, but also as your student progresses through the district. So particularly important becomes the middle school and high school levels. And that is our next person who's going to present is our middle school counselor. So I'll turn it back to Dr. Grayson.
All right, thanks, Beth. Sure. So our middle school support staff, we have 2 school counselors. We have Christy Coleman, who is 7th grade.
Hello.
And Liz Wolf, who is 8th grade. And we have Kathy Newport, who is our social worker for the middle school.
And they both are here. I think their mics aren't working. They both are here.
All right, thanks.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, my mute was off too. Hi.
So there's Liz, and then Kathy.
I'm Kathy.
You light up. Okay, so Christy Coleman is going to walk us through the support services that are being done currently at the middle school. Christy.
Yeah. Well, hello. Yes, I work with the current 7th grade this year, and I am happy to say that we have really, you know, stretched our muscles, and we've been really trying to connect with kids in a larger group way through our Google Classroom and through offering daily mindful moments. Mrs. Wolf and myself and Mrs. Newport, we will offer different times throughout the day to bring kids together to have 10 to 20 minutes to do some mindful moments to try and help de-stress them through the day. We are really trying to encourage and provide opportunities for all students to participate in activities centered around making connections with one another and with our, with our support staff, establish routines, and develop groundedness. We offer volunteer virtual lunch groups as well as in-person and remote. And then we just started these breathing techniques that I'm offering to students in the morning to just try to tap into their breaths and get connected. So I have been asked to kind of give us a sample of that. So it's about a time to just stop and connect. So stop what you're doing and just be present with your breathing. And we are trying to bring this chime into play. So here we go. And if you just want to get connected to your body on the seat, and inhale. And exhale. And just tap again into that breath, breathing in. Hold your breath and breathing out. And again, breathing in. Kind of pull to your mind's eye something that you're grateful for. Pull in that gratitude and feel the gratitude in your face and in your heart. And exhale. So there we have a little sample of what a morning mindful moment may look like for our students. It will probably go a little bit longer, but we just wanted to give you a little sample of that. So we also are offering weekly virtual counseling office hours for students that, if kids need to touch base with us again, it's more of an open format, larger group settings that we can offer our support. And then as well, we all have Google Classrooms, so we do some updates there to get information out to large groups. So all of that information, you will be able to find at a Google site, which we will talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So, you've heard about how we offer our services through classroom guidance and large group lessons, and the elementary summarized in small group settings that they're offering services. We're offering also virtual learnings through our Google Office Hours and larger group settings. And then I'd like to turn it to our high school folks and lead them in to bring us home and talk a little bit about the individual connections that we like to make with students. So I'll turn it back to Kathy so she can interview our high school. So thanks for joining us tonight, and it's nice to have you here.
Thanks, Christy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that we have decided to focus so much on mindfulness is because with an increase in anxiety with students and adults, there are small things throughout the day that you can do to help kind of refocus your brain, to move it away from the anxious thoughts and to calm it. So the thing that Christy did with getting you just to slow your breathing, it can be done with children as little as 2 years old, and it actually is a very effective technique. And sometimes you have to modify it if you have younger children, where you can ask them to smell the flower and then blow out the candle. But what you're trying to just do is have them calm their breathing patterns, because when any adult or child gets anxious, your breathing starts to be more rapid, and it's difficult to recover the emotional state that you're in. So the calming of the breathing is really key. And it's something that, we might exaggerate it a lot at the beginning. And people will think it's more yoga based, but as they learn that you're breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, they can do it very simply and quietly with no one even knowing it at times when they're starting to feel anxious. So that's something we definitely wanted to share with families. I'm going to introduce to you the high school support staff. Our counselors at the high school, we have Mary Beth Miller. We have Michelle Yanoff. You guys can say hi.
Hi, everyone.
We have Shauna Hunt and Matt Anselmino. And Denise Erb is our career counseling school counselor. Danielle Grimaldo is out on leave this year, but she is one of our high school counselors. And Leanne Guido is our social worker for the high school. So I'm going to turn things over to Matt so that he can highlight the supports going on at the high school.
Thanks, Dr. Graysick. Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening. Hopefully you found the information thus far to be valuable. I know it's certainly beneficial for the high school staff to be aware of the supports and interventions that are offered to the students in advance of their high school year. So it really has been beneficial for us thus far. It's important to realize the progression from kindergarten to senior year reflects an approach of addressing the students on more of a macro level at the younger ages. There tend to be group work and classroom lessons, which eventually becomes more of a micro approach as the students age, and it becomes more personalized in nature, one-on-one. Certainly that occurs at the lower levels as well, but much more at the high school age. High school is not only a culminating experience for students academically, but it's also a capstone for the acquisition of student emotional development, as well as mechanisms intended for use not only during school, but well beyond their school years. So therefore, relationships, especially individual relationships developed with the students, the parents, or the guardians, as well as the staff at the high school, as well as every school, is the foundation for support. The entire pupil service department really focuses on the entire child, but the extensions may vary from one grade level to another. The current slide that you're viewing reflects the high school's emphasis on relationships, personal, academic, work-related, etc., dependent upon what may be in that adolescent's life at that time. Mental health, physical health is certainly a significant factor. And finally, the academics and the post-secondary options, so not only what they're doing at the high school currently, but what their plans may be beyond high school. So when a potential need arises for the student, the staff relies upon a tiered approach, which is also evident on the slide. And it's a progression to interventions. Tier 1 is representative of every student at the high school, and it's an indicative of relationship building. So in the event that the student may require an additional intervention or additional support, he or she may be referred to a Tier 2 intervention identified as student assistance. It's the student assistance program, sometimes referred to as SAP, which includes frequent and student interactions that are scheduled with specific staff, including our social workers throughout the district. If the need persists or escalates, the third tier would then be relied upon as recommendations and supports from agencies outside of the traditional school day. Some of those services at the third tier intervention level or third tier level are similar to HSAO, which is what brought us here this evening. Shortly, you'll receive some additional insight and techniques from HSAO, which will further facilitate the transition from primary to high school and hopefully life beyond. So at this time, I'm going to pass it back over to Dr. Graysick. She'll review a final few pieces, and then we'll hopefully pass the presentation off to HSAO.
Great, thanks, Matt. So we just wanted to highlight a few things that you are able to find on the district's website. Over the past year, we have created Google Sites, and this is kind of a drop page that we have put a multitude of resources on. You can see some of the topics going down the left side in black, and in those topics, some are very building specific, where you can find information about, kindergarten, forms for the district, things in a specific building. Or as they're going down, there are a bunch of resources that are also available down there. And one of them that Leslie has done very well was creating the calming room that we have here with resources on how to allow students and families to access the resources that are in the calming room. Leslie, do you want to just touch a minute upon it and why we decided to go this route?
Sure. Actually, yes. What we decided was in a typical year, we would usually have a general building calming room, or in each classroom, especially at the younger levels, we would have a calming area with a calm down kit. So because of everything that's happening with the pandemic this year, we know we can't share materials and tangible items. I thought it might be a good idea to create something that could still be used in the same way, but individualized. So with the use of this virtual calming room, and now that K through 12 has one-on-one devices, instead of using an actual calm down kit and sharing materials that they would have to touch, they actually have this on their iPads. They can access it through their iPads. So if there is a moment where they may need to calm down, then they could go to a part of the room, or, in collaboration with their teacher, utilize this resource at school, also at home. And it's also nice for the teachers too, because they can pull up some of these sites in the classroom and do like a mindful Monday, or do some guided meditations after a recess or lunch or something like that, to get the students refocused, and it's in a safe way.
Great. Thanks, Leslie. So we are going to move into the second part of our presentation, the collaboration that we are doing with HSAO. So I'm going to introduce Lisa Ashbaugh, who is the Executive Director of HSAO, and I'll allow her to introduce her staff, and I'm going to stop sharing mine so that you can pull yours up, Lisa.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Angela's actually going to start sharing our presentation, but I just wanted to thank you for letting us be a part of tonight's presentation. So as mentioned, my name is Lisa Ashbaugh, and I am with HSAO, which stands for Human Services Administration Organization. And we are the provider agency for the Student Assistance Program across the Shaler Area School District. So tonight's presentation on managing stress during stressful times will be facilitated by three members of our team, Rosalind Zielinski, Angela Fratangelo, and Michael Lockett. So I'm going to pass it on to Rosalind to get us started, and then each of them will have a piece to the presentation as we move forward. So thank you again.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am just going to start with a little review of what stress is and how it might manifest physically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally before we get into the crux of how we might really deal with it. But stress is a natural reaction and can often be healthy. However, we know that toxic stress or chronic stress really puts us in a very different place. And a year into a global pandemic that was unexpected and that we were all unprepared for has probably put most of us here, regardless of your age. This slide talks about the natural reactions to stress. And when we look at change or transition, you might often consider that uncertainty. That's when you're uncertain about something and it causes a stress reaction in you. Often the response to this reaction is procrastination. And I think we see that a lot with our kids, and especially in their schoolwork at this point in time, without being able to access their teachers or their classmates as readily. We see a lot of procrastination in response to the stress of change or transition. Demand's exceeding resource really is the feeling that you have when you're overwhelmed, when you're just not sure where to start, which can also lead to procrastination. The last one, threats to physical or psychological well-being, is really what we feel when we get into fight, flight, or freeze. And I think it's really important to note here, as my colleague Michael Lockett says in other presentations, and I will borrow from him in this instance, is that we are still biologically wired to survive in an uncivilized jungle-like setting. Our mind still responds to a lot of very benign circumstances in fight, flight, or freeze, as if a bus was barreling towards us or a saber-toothed tiger was going to jump out from behind a tree. So it's important to know that these things are still happening to us all of the time, all day, every day, and that we have to learn to cope with them. And some mechanisms are forthcoming in the presentation. So we're going to talk about some of the manifestations, the signs and symptoms. Thank you, Angela. So physical symptoms are here on your screen, and you can see what I think there's a couple of important things to note is that we usually don't just have one physical symptom of stress. that you can have a multitude of these, and your perception of what they mean can cause more stress. So especially during a global pandemic, you get a headache, you're having difficulty sleeping, you're exhausted. What's the first thing you think? Oh goodness, I have COVID, which could certainly increase your stress level at that point in time. Sleep is exceptionally important for overall health and well-being. And what we know is that stress interrupts our sleep patterns. The more stress we feel, the less routine that we have, and the lack of routine interrupts our sleep patterns. So anything that we can do to try to get our sleep, get at least 8 hours a night, we know that children often need a lot more, and to calm down in a routine, and to recognize that a lot of these symptoms are. We've seen a lot of changes in eating habits, weight loss and weight gain through the pandemic too. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides from now. So this is our cognitive, so our thought patterns and our feelings. And I actually wish it said emotional and cognitive, because we certainly know that we feel before we think. And it's often what we think that helps us manage our feelings, but you will always feel first. And I'm sorry, Angela, can you go back just one? I did want to make another point that I've forgotten here. Sorry, here in physical. I wanted to bring up the point that a lot of people at this point in time are complaining of malaise. So when you have multiple physical symptoms of stress, often you have a generalized feeling of discomfort, illness, or uneasiness. And so I think that a lot of people at this point in time are interpreting that as a greater sickness when it's really just a sign of chronic stress. Fatigue would fall into this too, extreme tiredness and lack of energy or motivation, which I think we see in ourselves and often in our students and our children at this point in time. Thank you, Angela. I wanted to get that point in there. So as I was saying, we always feel before we think. And I want to make a couple of points here. I think that we see these in our students and in ourselves, but there has been a lot of research since the pandemic started about the difference between loneliness, isolation, and boredom. And I think it's important here when we're thinking about how we manage things to think about what we're feeling. Loneliness isn't the lack of social relationships. It's an unhappiness or inability to be satiated by the quality of your relationships. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. I give the example that we always had a supervisors meeting at my work. And Lisa, my executive director, always brought us food. And so we would sit around the table, and this meeting was as much an important meeting as it was a social event for us to eat and have this kind of quality thing. When I think of our students, I think of them changing classes, the interactions they had at lockers, in lunchrooms, all of these things that say it's not all work all day, right? We're like going back and forth. We're naturally curious people that we're not having a lot of now, which is adding to stress. We're all isolated, which just means that we're distanced from our relationships. We all know that having a Zoom party or a Zoom get-together is not the same thing as attending a school dance or an evening out or a picnic or a barbecue. All of this leads us to be emotionally less available and have more difficulty concentrating, feeling preoccupied, especially because our days now often are all Zoom meetings, right? It's all the same thing. You're not going back and forth between social and emotional interactions and then academics or work. They talked earlier about anxiety, which is really heightened at this point in time. Anxiety seems to be the one thing that everybody feels. And I think that we're feeling anxious because we are naturally curious people, and our curiosity is not being provoked in the way that it was pre-pandemic. Boredom is what happens, and I think we'll talk about it in the next slide. If you could give me the next slide, Angela, thank you so much. Boredom is the feeling that most impacts our behaviors, and it's the dull, repetitive, or monotonous kind of things that occur. And it's often mistaken for anxiety, for feelings of hunger, and for exhaustion. So oftentimes it's just the fact that we're not being stimulated enough that we see a lot of these behavioral aspects of chronic stress. So the withdrawal or the isolation, just because we weren't active enough all day, the overeating, the undereating, signs of boredom. What isn't listed here, and I thought was really important and probably really important for students, is avoidance. Another behavioral aspect that we see is extreme and increased avoidance of activities, just not knowing where to start. And Michael will touch on some ways to deal with that as we move forward. I think it's important to note that in this time of chronic stress and a circumstance that none of us could foresee, is that we need to take time to be patient with ourselves, patient with our children, understand that not all of these behaviors or feelings are intentional, that we're not necessarily intentionally procrastinating or intentionally avoiding, and that we really need to allow ourselves and our students and children time to mourn. There was a lot of loss this year. And of course, we try to preach, gratitude, and we want to be grateful and be happy about the things, but giving a little bit of space to say, hey, I lost a lot. When I think of the little kids, I think about their first ever school experiences, kindergarten, first grade. When I think about the older kids, I think about all those really important social aspects, those sporting events, attending and playing, proms, dances, graduations, and that we really just need to be patient and give a little time to mourn and acknowledge our disappointments before we can move on from them. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Angela.
Thanks, Roz. So what we're going to talk about are maybe two new terms that some of you may have heard of. The first is Zoom fatigue and the other is caution fatigue. Both of these are surrounded around a level of burnout that we are now experiencing in this new normal. Zoom fatigue is described as a tiredness, worry, or burnout associated with the overusing of virtual platforms of communication. I know from experience, we are scheduling Zoom meetings back to back. We're not giving us time for a break, for a snack, and that is really important in this new normal and in this new virtual world that we are living. Just as, we would have time to travel or have maybe a 15-minute break in between our typical face-to-face meetings, it's very important that we also schedule that time in any virtual setting as well. The other term that I mentioned previously is caution fatigue. And so that is the desensitization of all of the new information that we hear in the news related to COVID. After months of isolation and anxiety that we do feel, we just want to relax from some of the precautions that we have to deal with every day, like washing hands, wearing masks, socially distancing ourselves. And these are very important not only to keep ourselves safe, but to keep everyone else safe. Both of these, fatigues can result in the level of burnout, but there are very simple ways to combat this burnout. We can take breaks, we can go outside with the weather hopefully looking better, we can exercise and use other coping strategies as well. Other strategies for managing stress. We want to recognize and listen and respond to our bodies. When we are in high levels of stress, there are some different red flags that we see, like eating habits. They may increase or even decrease, like Roz mentioned previously. Our mood can have significant changes. And also, like Roz mentioned recently, sleeping can be disrupted. We might either have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep through the night. So we want to make sure that we listen to these warning signs, these red flags that we experience on a day in and day out basis. The best way we can kind of help combat these is through practicing self-care. And just as easy it is to combat our fatigue, it's as easy to practice self-care as taking a 5-minute break, watching a TV show with your family, and also my favorite, unplugging from our technology and social medias, since that is the core of what we do day in and day out. Main thing is that we want to focus on what we can control rather than what we cannot. We don't want to have a temporary perspective on focusing on things that continuously change, like different regulations or being able to see our family members and our loved ones. We want to focus on things that are staying the same. And what we want to focus on, we want to look at the complexity of the situation that we all face now since the pandemic begun. We are isolated from each other, but we are able to still develop meaningful connections based on the types of communications we have with our friends and our family, and even our teachers as well. There's power in finding, purposeful interactions and activities that we like to do. So, if you like going on walks or playing with your dog, make sure you set some time for you to do that and enjoy that time and be connected with that time. Again, I will never stress how important self-care is during this time that we're experiencing. We have to take care of ourselves and engage in time that we want to do, in things that we want to do. I know setting limits on technology, since we are all behind it, day in, day out with school and our jobs ourselves, can be very impactful. So now I want to pass it along to my colleague, Michael, as well.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation. So I think it's interesting, we're working through students through the SAT process and really identifying that they're struggling with engagement with academics or they have a therapeutic need. And I would say 95% of the time when I sit down with them, they pretty readily say, when I ask, what do you think your challenge is right now? They'll say, I'm just not motivated. And, I think it's this situation where they've kind of gone through the school year, especially at this point. And we know avoidance, I call avoidance the devil, because it's a temporary coping mechanism. It's a negative coping mechanism, but it pushes things down the road. And I think students are in a position, if they're struggling in these areas where they've done that, pretty consistently throughout the year, and now this is way bigger than what they can chip away. So really an analogy that we start with or really encourage them is to find a place to come down for a landing. So it's sort of like you're in a helicopter over the horizon and you have a really clear view of this, this vista of things that, you need to accomplish or haven't accomplished and you're not sure where to start. So it's finding one simple act, one simple thing that you can do. And usually that primary act is finding a helper. So, just really encouraging students to find a place to start so that they can chip away. And that is finding someone who can help, because otherwise they're pretty overwhelmed and, not sure exactly where to start in terms of motivation. So, and I'm going to talk about setting goals. So, that's really relevant to motivation and something that's, seems to have been pretty helpful to the students that we're working with. So the idea is that we set, goals, and the goals that we establish are SMART goals. So they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're tangible. So, just some examples of some general goals. A general goal might be, hey, I want to get in shape. That's not necessarily a SMART goal. A SMART goal or a measurable goal would be to commit to working out 3 days a week, 25 minutes. So that's something that you can measure weekly, and it's very relevant, and say, have I put in that time? Another just general goal, and students readily identify general goals pretty well, but I think where they need the additional support is to make it measurable. So, a general goal might be, I want to get my grade up in geometry. But a really specific measurable goal would be to say, hey, I'm going to spend 2 hours a week, just extra to put in the effort to improve in geometry. So, I think the point about establishing goals and what's important is that goals are not finite. They're fluid. They're designed to motivate us and not punish us. I think we've all been in situations where we may have set goals for ourselves that we haven't achieved or haven't been successful with and can be hard on ourselves. But it's better to look at it in a fluid way and in a sense that, okay, maybe I've established goals for myself and I haven't been necessarily productive towards them or my ideal successful, but then realizing, hey, maybe that's something that's more of an ideal for me, but not really an important goal, or right now it's not an attainable goal for me. So, I would encourage, and again, I'm primarily working with students on the middle school, high school level, but then to identify just 3 basic goals and have them be visible. I know Roz in previous presentations has talked about the power of vision boards, or just something that they can see, that they can measure weekly to keep them immediate. So the first type of goal that we talk about setting would be a self-improvement goal. And I always jokingly say, if you can't readily identify a self-improvement goal, ask the people you live with, they'll identify several for you. So, and a lot of times students, they're identifying those around structuring a morning routine, improving their grades. And again, these are general things, but, the directions that they're thinking in, attending class, socializing a little bit more, practicing some mindfulness, clearing their room, getting on a sleep schedule is a big goal that a lot of students have identified in the work that we do with them. So that is a self-improvement goal. The second type of goal that we encourage, or would encourage parents to identify with their students, especially if they're struggling a little bit during this time, is what we would call a passion goal. And I know that there are people out there or students may say, I'm not really passionate about anything. So then that might be more of a critical thinking goal. So that's something that is fostering an interest to you. So that's something that you can throw your energy into to keep you stimulated. I think we all kind of need those projects and those things right now. Virtual learning may not always be the most motivating thing. So if you have something on the periphery or something that you're focusing your spare time and your extra energy on, that can be a really powerful thing. Flipping furniture, rebuilding that old maybe motorbike that's been sitting in the garage for 2 years, getting the guitar or the telescope out from under the bed that your grandparents bought you and you've never thought about touching, right? Cooking, trying things that are different. I think it's important too in this category to encourage students to do things that they may not generally consider that they would readily do, or that they wouldn't think that they would be successful, just to have a different experience. So if you have a student in your house that has never cooked, maybe say, why don't you make dinner tonight? And again, it's kind of a way to sort of develop some neurons and get outside of this routine and this sort of mundane sort of life that virtual learning and just the pandemic has sort of put us into. And then the last type of goal, the third type of goal that we always encourage students to identify, is to form an empathic goal. So, and that's something that you would of course do for another person that has intrinsic value and fosters a sense of service. So it may be helping out a family member, helping someone with childcare in your family, checking in on a neighbor, some participating in some civic organizations, maybe a food bank, or just reaching out to a peer at school, maybe someone that you think about, that you see in the hall and you kind of talk to and maybe they didn't have a lot of friends, but just a simple text message or a check-in can be a great empathic goal. Doing enrichment with pets, I think. Right now, me being home a lot, I see my pets and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so bored. So I was trying to do a little bit more enrichment with them, and just really additionally incorporating some meaning into your work. Roz and I have worked with a lot of students who are kind of need that gross motor sensory input. So they have all these cool controlled fidgets, have done things. I know I personally have I guess downgraded my office chair to an exercise ball just to get some sensory integration into my day. Students will use really cool backgrounds in Zoom. So we've had students log into meetings from a spaceship in a dystopia planet somewhere, which incorporates some fun in meeting and maybe just checking in with peers throughout the day and things like that. And then I'm going to move on just a little bit to touch on managing time. And we found that it's been really helpful to get students to identify that there are two types of time. We have negotiable time and non-negotiable time. So negotiable time, and I think we all know that we have 24 hours in a day, right? And I would say it's fair to say generously, probably 5 of those hours are just ours to do, leisurely things, recreational things, decompress, veg out. Our non-negotiable time is school or work, right? So we're committed to 8 hours a day for school or work. Sleep 8 hours a day is non-negotiable. Also just hygiene, eating, those things are a couple hours a day as well. So really, it might be an interesting thing to sit down with your student and identify, okay, am I putting in 8 hours a day of school? Am I sleeping 6 to 8 hours a evening? If you're not, or if they're not, they're already operating at a deficit. So it's a really kind of, pragmatic way to get them to see how they're spending their time. And again, that time is qualitative. So, we talk a lot about managing interrupters. I think, I'm amazed at the amount of interrupters that students are faced with throughout their school day. We know technology, we get notifications, text messages. It becomes challenging to manage calls from friends. We're on multiple devices throughout the day. So yeah, they may say, yeah, I spend a full day at school. I'm there from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. But how much have you been engaging school mindfully or meaningfully without those interrupters subtracting from your time? And again, if those things are significant, they are operating at a deficit. And again, on this slide, just avoidance is your enemy. I know Ross touched on that. And again, students are really struggling with this concept. It's the idea of, and I've had them use the term ghosting. I've ghosted school this year. And again, it's that unhealthy coping mechanism that, just keeps getting bigger and bigger over time. And then we're going to move on to the next slide, which is the resiliency scale. And this has been something that's been pretty helpful to help students dissect, again, focusing on what they can control. So, if you think of it as a seesaw or a scale, we all have negative experiences, or there are a significant number of things that we can't control. We can't control that there's a pandemic. We don't have any control over whether or not we're learning virtually or in the building. Maybe we have family stressors. We have another the day-to-day stressors of life on top of all this stuff. So there are layers this year. So those are our negative experiences or our negative factors. There's not a lot we can control there. And I think sometimes it's easy for our students to look at those things and justify why they're not performing well. And they have a good narrative for those things. And I think, as a mental health worker, we've given them really strong narratives on mental health as well. And they can readily identify, oh, yeah, I'm just depressed, or, I have anxiety. But then they really struggle with those protective factors on the other side of that scale, where they can't readily identify things that they can control. So that's, spending time with people that you care about, that's meaningful, practicing mindfulness, managing your schedule, managing your devices, and that fulcrum there, that sort of triangle, sometimes we have to shift that. And we know if our negative experiences significantly outweigh our protective factors, we're not going to be doing well. So we have to shift that fulcrum and really load in those protective factors right now, to kind of help us achieve our goals and be mindful learners. And then in the next slide, it's just a little bit about self-care. And again, I think, we touched on this a lot, just identifying healthy habits, maintaining a regular sleep schedule, mind-body practices, building breaks into your schedule. Angela mentioned going for walks. Breathing exercises are really powerful if you can get your students to engage those. We are in situations where we can't control a lot of the outcomes, but if you can control your breathing, that will give you a good locus of control. Visualization is really a strong thing, right? If your anxiety is high and you're in a stressful situation, visualizing just a place that you find is very beautiful or meaningful can really help. And of course, there are, other really active practices like yoga and Tai Chi for mindfulness that can really be beneficial for those healthy habits. And of course, it's always good to take a break. I think we're all in a position, we talk about limiting our media exposure. Sometimes we have to unplug. It's interesting that I was talking about this with a group of students who are pretty, high performance, high anxiety students. And we were talking about, what is a reasonable amount of time for them to unplug? In my world, for my generation, I can say I can unplug for a weekend. So for me, it's reasonable to say I can unplug a couple hours a night. And they struggled, Angela and I were doing a group, they struggled to commit to 10 minutes. So I think culturally, it's just good to have a gauge where they're at with their access to devices and what they can actually do. So, and that's a starting point, right? Culturally, it's very different for them. But if they can get 10 minutes of just mindful, unplugging, being in the present, that can, really serve them well throughout the day and kind of managing stress and anxiety. And then I think I'm just going to finish off with this last slide. It's sort of this idea of where to get help if you continue to struggle. Again, if you can identify that one tangible thing, that one simple act, coming down for a landing, it's finding a helper. So of course you can connect with friends, family, other community resources, groups, church communities, things like that might be meaningful for you. We found, and I've never utilized our employee assistance program at work, and they did some presentations on resiliency that we recently utilized that I thought were just absolutely amazing. And it was a resource that I had never considered tapping into. So that was something, or it might be something if you're a parent to check into and see what your company has to offer. Checking in with your health insurance provider, stress programs, programs for dealing with depression, therapy. There are life coaches out there. And of course, we always encourage people, if they're struggling or have any therapeutic need, to seek out help from a mental health professional, and your school counselors or us through the SAP program. That is really one of our primary functions, is to get students linked to those therapeutic resources if they are experiencing depression, anxiety, especially during this time. And of course, you can always talk to your doctor or a medical professional just to get some insight too and some direction. And I know I've worked with a lot of parents who have utilized that, as a first go-to if they notice a change or how their student is struggling kind of with virtual learning or depression or, again, therapeutic needs, especially during the pandemic. So that's really all that we had to present. So I'll pass it back to Dr. Graysick.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the staff at HSAO. The work that we are able to do collaborating together is really, really useful and productive work. So, to families who are listening, there are quite a few takeaways for this. But, one of the things that I know as a mental health task force that we have been doing for several years at Shaler, that comes up is that we want to fix everything at the same time, because we want to help as many kids as we can. And what it usually ends up doing is frustrating us all. So, when you're looking at some of these issues that you or your child might be experiencing, it's good to keep in mind that small steps work best because you can master small steps faster and then move on to bigger steps. So breaking it down, you don't have to try to fix everything all at once. But good habits in the making are really what our kids need. And that part about resiliency is so crucial to them entering the real world as they get older into being adults. It's not our job to smooth every road for them. Kids learn by making mistakes, and it's our job to support them through them so that they don't continue to make them. But it's not our job to fix every one of them so that they don't understand the natural consequence of it. So it's that fine line that I know many of us experience with parenting, that you want to build that within them so that they can learn. Sometimes life's not fair, but they're going to find a way to move through it and become stronger on the other side of it. So I think those were all great tips, things that were shared with you. I think were very simple, easy to grab and use as a resource. I did record the segment tonight, and we will be posting it on the district website. So if you know someone who was not able to join tonight, they will be able to access the YouTube video there and view again, and we will be sending it home in the weekly parent communication as well. Again, I want to thank all of the Shaler area student services staff. So can you give us a wave? And thank you also to the
Welcome.
HSA staff. Can you give us a wave? We really appreciate the collaboration. And for all of you who are listening in, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy night. We appreciate it.
Thanks to our tech support too for helping us put this together, right? So I appreciate you, Dr. Graysick, for all the work that you did. So thank you.
Yep. And thank you, Mitch, for putting this all together. We appreciate you.
Mm-hmm. Sure
All right.
do.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.